Peter Parker has had it rough the past few months, moving away with his wife only to be brought back to New York. But with the return of his greatest foe, Norman Osborn, things have gotten even crazier. With the loss of his brother and daughter, Peter Parker and his wife Mary Jane must cope with their losses. Between their return to college, Norman Osborn, the Stacy family, new gangs, ninjas, and the TRAPSTER, will they rise above it all or crack under the weight? Welcome to the Forgotten Era, where we'll answer all those questions and more. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Forgotten Era podcast. It's me, Ethan, again, on every episode of the show. Today, I am joined by the host of the Comic Shenanigans podcast, Adam Chapman. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, I am Adam Chapman. I do run a podcast called Comic Shenanigans. I've been doing it since 2012, which is crazy to say out loud, although there was 1 year of hiatus. We're at about 1,100 episodes or so. We do usually, book of the month every month. We do a creator spotlight every month, and then we do 2 creator interviews every month. So that's kind of our remit. It's interesting. We have kind of a dovetail because I'm obsessed with the 90s in comics. I love getting people from Marvel in the 90s or DC in the 90s to come on the show and talk about it. I've had people from Wizard Magazine talking about kind of what they were doing in the 90s as well. So it kind of meshes up nicely with the remit of your podcast.
I think it's great that we kind of connected because obviously, like, I'm very active on Twitter, and I see a lot of the same people over and over again in like notifications and stuff. And I've been intrigued, and you've replied to a lot of stuff and liked a lot of stuff. So when I posted about the podcast and you reached out, I was pretty excited. And I've really enjoyed listening to the like 4 or 5 episodes that I have of your show. I really like your very specific questions to creators and how like you actually know and love everything you're talking about, which is kind of awesome because I get a lot of comments from people about this show about kind of the same thing. And I think the thing that's kind of really nice actually is that, I mean, you're of that time period and I'm not of that time period. So it's cool to see kind of like both sides with that same sort of like love of those specific time periods in comics. I don't know if you want to go into like your history of Spider-Man, like how you came to love and came to find these books. But if you want to, feel free.
Sure. It's interesting. I would say in a lot of ways, I came to comics late. A lot of people, especially when people I interview, they're always talking about how, comics were put on, in front of them when they were like 5 or 6 years old. They learned to read with them. That just wasn't my experience. I did have a few comics here and there, but they weren't really much of anything. Like they're kind of late 80s kind of Superman. I had a couple issues, but it wasn't much of anything. And then in the mid 90s, I was a big fan of the Spider-Man animated series, the X-Men animated series that were very impactful on me. So I started picking up some issues here and there. I remember the summer of Maximum Carnage. I was picking up a few of those issues at the newsstand. I only was able to get the Amazing Spider-Man issues, but I would see, in the background, in the letters pages, they were talking about upcoming issues. So those covers were imprinted on my mind. When I was in junior high, I had a friend who was reading a lot of the Clone Saga stuff, so I actually experienced a lot of it kind of reading vicariously through him, and thought a lot of it was kind of crazy. And then around that time, right when Onslaught was happening, that was my actual entry point into buying monthly comics. I started buying X-Men comics, and that was kind of what first kind of got me in. I always say that what got me into comics was X-Men. What kept me in comics was Spider-Man. Because about a year later, I was in the hospital for a concussion, and I, at the gift shop, someone picked up an Amazing Spider-Man issue. It was Amazing Spider-Man 419, which is the first post-Clone Saga issue of Amazing Spider-Man, and I was hooked, and I've been buying Amazing Spider-Man ever since. So the period you're talking about is really my sweet spot because I went back and fell in love with a lot of the Clone Saga stuff, in and around that period. But really me buying on a regular basis was right in the sweet spot of what you're talking about. And so I didn't have a lot of money. So generally I was only reading the Amazing Spider-Man issues, but a bunch of these Peter Parker Spider-Mans I was able to pick up. I was starting to dabble into some of the crossovers. Thankfully, it wasn't like the Clone Saga where it was mandatory reading every month. But so I was able to experience Spider Hunt when it happened, and Identity Crisis, and the final chapter, Gathering of Five. This stuff really meant a lot to me at the time because I was just being exposed to this world. It was also in and around this time where and I think you mentioned this on one of your last episodes, but the world's greatest comics, and you open up the gatefold and it had all
Yeah, the
that
gatefold. Yeah,
information. When you're a kid and you don't know a lot about comics and you're just kind of getting into Spider-Man's world, that was everything. Like, it was so exciting to have this illustrated recap. Like, nowadays they have that kind of boring text page, but it
yeah.
was this full exciting like way of getting you into comics, and it was really working for me because when I would pick up a new book at that point, I was like, oh, I'm getting all this information that I don't necessarily have. There wasn't the internet in the same way that there is now. You couldn't just look up Wikipedia, Marvel fandom, and find out everything about these characters. So this was your entry point. So again, this is a very special sweet spot that we're talking about today.
That's great. I really love that because it really is. I mean, the title of the podcast is kind of entirely true in a way because I feel like now, like more so, I see younger people. I say younger people, everybody like my age or a little bit younger, who have kind of gotten into this time period, but Marvel makes it so hard
Mm.
because you only have amazing, most of sensational,
Hmm.
and like every 6 issues or so of the other books to read. And then of course, the crossovers and stuff, and then
Hmm.
even the last little bit too. But it's really unfortunate that it really is just kind of forgotten both by Marvel and by readers, because I see people even that I'll post something about one of these books and it'll be like, how unfortunate that editorial meddling ruined this time period. And in my mind, that's not until a little bit later. Because, like,
Hmm.
I mean, there's obviously some there, in terms of how Peter and MJ are kind of always fighting. So, like, that's a little bit of that. They're getting ready to break that off. But a lot of it, I mean, is just kind of like pure Spider-Man as that kind of like back to basics sort of thing after the Clone Saga. But yeah, those gatefolds are great. I was really upset when I was finally like picking up the single issues of these books years and years later, obviously. And then they stopped doing those. I was really upset about that, but that was a really great thing. I love when comics have that like entry way, because
Hmm.
the whole every comic is someone's first comic thing is very true. But yeah, it's great that this is your period in time, and I really like that. So whenever we can find somebody that's attached to it, I think it's a whole other perspective versus a lot of the guests that I have on where I'm introducing them to this time period, and it's like for 2 or 3 issues at a time. So they don't even go and like read everything. It's just kind of they hop in and, oh, that was a cool story, or whatever it might be. So
It's funny you say that because so I don't know if you've ever listened to the Amazing Spider Talk podcast.
I have on and off for years. I was really into them around like the Superior Spider-Man time.
Okay. So I'm pretty good friends with Dan, who's the co-host there. And so way back when my series podcast was about, I think episode 298, I was like, can you come on? I'd love to have you on. So he comes on and I'm like, do you want to come back for my centennial? Like, that'd be fun. And so it's kind of been our way that every 100 episodes of my podcast, he would come back. And he's like, well, you don't always have to have me come back for centennials. I can come back more often. So the last couple times I've had him come back on, I've been like, I'm going to force you to read stuff you've never really read before. I mean, he owns all of Amazing Spider-Man and a lot of the B titles, but he hasn't necessarily read them all or sequentially read them. So I think one of the times I brought him back, we talked about Amazing Spider-Man, I think it was 426 to 428, which is the resurrection of Doc Ock, which, again, he had never really read all at once. And then we also, the last time I had him on, we talked about, I think, Peter Parker Spider-Man 94 to 95,
Okay.
which
Yeah.
was one of them has the elevator drop, and it's an
94
exciting
is
issue.
94 is an interesting book.
94 is the one with the ox, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
With
So actually,
the Watcher and the Jill Stacy
yeah,
stuff.
it's super weird. But when I read it, I do feel like a kid again, and a lot of it's because it's building up something that unfortunately never has a payoff. But you get this sense that, like, ooh, gang war is happening. Like, there's a lot
Yeah.
of brilliant setup in that comic that unfortunately does not go anywhere. But if you read it in isolation, it feels very exciting. It feels like I want to read what happens next. Unfortunately, what happens next doesn't really build off that necessarily, but you feel like you're getting somewhere.
there's a lot in this time period that kind of goes nowhere, which I think is the most unfortunate part of it. But yeah,
Hmm.
when, like, as you said, as you're reading it isolated, like if you're just reading Peter Parker, it all kind of flows really well. And 95 is one of my favorite issues, like probably ever.
It's
Um,
great.
yeah, that 88, like I love Howard Mackie. He's like my favorite writer, I guess I would say. I don't know. But yeah, he's definitely up there. I love his Peter Norman. It's like really as is an overused term, but peak. Like it's just really great. He writes them really well together. Um, I'll ask you one last question before we can get into everything else. Do you have a favorite like title of this time period, or is it kind of just like love them all equally?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, so I have a really soft spot for Peter Parker Spider-Man, although I will say I did not read necessarily all the issues in real time, as I mentioned. Like Amazing Spider-Man was my thorough line. So I read all of those. I loved everything with the True Believers, all that stuff. So that was the one that meant more to me, I guess. But when I look at the covers and I look at what JR was doing at this time, I'm really excited by Peter Parker Spider-Man. Like Spectacular was really good too. You guys did a great discussion of 250, which is such a forgotten masterpiece. Like it's this great issue, this great thing that happens, and no one ever talks about it. But I really like that comic. And JMD was doing such really cool stuff there. Sensational was kind of all over the place because I think the earlier kind of post Clone Saga, the early part was really interesting. You had the Savage Land, you had the part when he had Vertigo, you had Vulture, but then you have that weird kind of stuff with the Technomancer. No, not Technomancer, but there's like the magic stuff. And
Yeah,
then I
yeah,
was kind of like, I'm less into this.
yeah. They did two Magic stories back to back, and that's where I kind of got lost on Sensational for a while. And then pretty much after that, it's smooth sailing. Um,
Yeah,
but
it gets
well,
better.
until the last two stories. But
I'll say one last thing. I know that I'm the one with time constraints, and I keep making this longer. But I will say, sensational Spider-Man. So generally speaking, I'm not someone who has a lot of signatures of comics. Like it was just never really something I was that worried about. But when I was a kid, I did love the Hornet issues of Sensational. So I had the alternate cover that actually had like Sensational Hornet #1, and then on the interior you had the Spider-Man cover. So I had that, and I had the second issue. And I remember I was at a convention in Toronto, and Mike Waringo was there, and so I remember like I got him to sign those two books. But what I remember more about that interaction is as I was in line, I heard someone saying, "Oh, I love your stuff. It's so good. I wish you were staying on the book." And he was saying something to the effect of, "John Byrne gets what John Byrne wants." And then so basically the idea that he would have stayed on, but John Byrne wanted to do Spider-Man, and they were going to do this thing with John Byrne, and if John Byrne asked for something, they're going to give it to him. So that's why his run on Spider-Man ended. So I just always remember that as a kid, being like, "Oh man,
yeah, at least he got to come back a little bit later with Peter David, but it
it's
was
true."
at that unfortunate point in time where he passed. So it, that sort of didn't line up super well. But yeah, I love, if nothing else, I think the thing that I like about Sensational, I say this pretty much on every episode we cover it, because like there are some issues of that book that I really love, and Todd is an
Mm.
incredible writer, and he really
Mm-hmm.
loves the characters, and he really is dedicated to the time period. But the thing that I always like rehash and rehash is like I don't care if I like the story, it's stupid and fun to read. Like things just happen and they just do whatever they want, and it really is just kind of, for the lack of a better term, the fuck it book, where Todd and Mike go, well, let's do this, and it doesn't have to tie to
Mm-hmm.
anything else because it's just their book. So they get the most unserious book until it has to be roped into those crossovers, which kind of take up the latter half. But I really
Mm-hmm.
like Mike's last issue, 31, is like
Mm.
an incredible book to me. I love, he just like goes all out on art. They kind of like cap off stories, and
Mm-hmm.
then they end there. But yeah, so in terms of today's episode, we're covering Peter Parker 85 through 88. This is the last little bit before we get to Spider Hunt. The plan for the podcast is that we have this episode. We have the next week's episode is going to be covering the rest of Spectacular up to Spider Hunt. It's, up to 254, I think. Um, and then it's Clone Saga time for us here, which is very unusual. And then we'll get back to it. with Spider Hunt eventually. Um,
Awesome.
yeah. Well, when it comes to Peter Parker, starting with Peter Parker, Spider-Man number 85, titled Little Lies. This book was released on September 17th of 1997, written by Howard Mackey, with guest pencils by Andy Smith, Scott Hanna on inks, and Mark Bernardo on colors. In the Parker Watson home, Aunt Anna tries to interfere with Peter's laundry. Freaking out since his suit is in there, he lies and says he told MJ he'd do his own laundry from now on. Anna says she'll keep Peter's little secret when MJ appears. She tells Peter that the two of them and Jill are going to go to a party, whether Peter wants to or not. Pete begins to change his clothes, with the Spidey suit underneath, and MJ says she was hoping they could leave him behind for the night. Peter responds by saying he is him. Elsewhere, Paul Stacy is dealing with constant harassment from Donovan Zane. Arthur is upset with Paul for partnering with them at all, and letting his obsession of Gwen and George's death lead him to bad decisions. The two begin to argue when Jill enters the scene. Donovan and the other Friends of Humanity make plans to hire professionals to handle Paul's betrayal. Out on the town, Jill says she wants Paul to talk to and trust her like he did Gwen. Paul believes that Gwen was the only one who actually understood him. Arriving at the party, the Stacys are met by the Parkers. After sitting down, MJ and Jill leave the boys at the table while they go to use the restroom. Peter tries to talk to Paul, but Paul has a massive grudge against Peter. He's jealous of all the time Pete got to have with Gwen and Captain Stacy, which is time they should have spent with him instead. In the bathroom, Jill talks about how Paul's changes after the deaths of their relatives, becoming a loner, fighting more, resenting their father, yada yada. Jill knows that Paul is hiding something more, but she doesn't know exactly what. Returning to the table, Paul is making his way out. Peter runs after him, but Paul pins him to a wall and says that he doesn't want a friend to confess his secrets to. He gives Pete one last warning to stay away before leaving. Pete's spider senses begin to go off, though, and he suits up. Paul is met by the Shocker, who has been hired by Zane to finish Paul off. Paul submits, accepting his fate, but Spidey swings into the scene. Spidey throws a tracer on Paul and fights with Shocker. Shocker erupts a gas main and gets away. Peter follows Paul's tracer to the Brooklyn/George Washington Bridge, whichever one you prefer, and Peter thinks Paul's going to kill himself, but that wasn't the plan. Now that Spidey's here, though, Pete wants to see what he's made of and begins to walk off the bridge. And that's that. So,
yep,
I don't
that's
know
an issue of a comic.
I don't know how you specifically feel about this one. It's just, I think, so I talk about how much I love Howard Mackey, and then I can read books like this, and it jumps around a lot. Like, there's so much, and I mean, kind of a lot of the books from this time period of Spider-Man and kind of in general do a lot of jumping. But I find myself, whenever I have to write recaps for the show, that Mackey and Todd DeZago love to just like jump around and be like, here's a random interlude, here's a random jump. But I mean, it's okay. I don't know if I love the guest pencils. It's hard to kind of have anyone but JR on this title and be like super happy with it. But, you know, it is a comic book. It is an issue of a comic book, and it could be a lot worse, I think.
It's interesting. I would say that it's comics like this when I was younger that I had difficulty parsing certain things. And what I mean by that, and actually probably a better example is like Chuck Austin's X-Men, is that was a book where if the art was bad or not bad, not to my taste or not something I enjoyed, it colored everything. And I really couldn't pull apart if I actually liked the story, because what I was getting visually was so arresting or took me away from it that I just couldn't appreciate it. So as I've gotten older, when I used to write comic reviews and when I talk more with creators now, I really try to give them more grace and try to pull apart how much of my experience is colored by the art and not necessarily the story. And I think this is one of those cases where the art is not really to my taste. I don't think it's Andy Smith's best work. I think a lot of it just the character work isn't necessarily that solid. I think some of the facial expressions aren't consistent from panel to panel. The acting of the characters is a little bit too broad, and at times, it looks a little sloppy. Like there's the shot of you mentioned, Peter Parker getting dressed into his Spider-Man outfit, and like the look on Peter's face. I'm like, that's not Peter. Like that doesn't feel any on model. And this is in the period when they were still very much leaning on model Peter. Like these days, we're used to seeing a lot more varied interpretations of Peter, but at this point, that's not necessarily the case. And yet, we're getting this version of him that just doesn't like feel right. So I would say that kind of draws me out of it. To your point about him jumping, about Howard Mackie jumping around, I mean, that feels very much old school comics to me, that you have a lot going on, you'll have the main plot, then you'll switch to an interlude, then you'll come back. What I do appreciate, and I don't know if I would have appreciated it as much at the time, is that when you have that conversation between Peter and Paul, and then also the conversation between Jill and MJ, and they're, back-to-back panels, that's very much like something you'd see on a TV show, where they do like intercutting because they're kind of talking about something similar but different, and so you intercut it between those moments, and you're getting that here. I would understand when you're trying to write a recap, it's like, well, how do I do this in a way that's concise?
Right.
But I did appreciate, again, it kind of keeps the flow going. I don't think the pencils were up to the task of being able to really do enjoyable talking heads. I think it's more egregious when you have MJ and Jill. It's almost like the same picture of them doing their lipstick. Like it looks like he just kind of flipped the model. Like it doesn't look like it's a different person almost. It looks like he just kind of flipped the image, and so it doesn't look like it's really trying too much. Whereas at least with the Paul part, you feel him being more belligerent and angry. Now I will say it's interesting to see how fast Paul gets this angry as a person, because he did not start that way, and not that many issues prior, but obviously at this point he's very much in over his head. So there's a lot to like here. It's just buried underneath visuals that I don't love. And I think nowhere is that more evident than like the last page, because you get that last page, you have Spider-Man very dramatically jumping towards Paul, and then you get to the next issue and it's completely different. Like it has nothing
Yeah.
to do with this. It's like JR didn't read the previous issue and just kind of did his own thing. But to be honest, it's better, so it just kind of works. But yeah, this is a very odd one. Also, just from an editorial perspective, they say that next issue's the conclusion to this shocking tale, but it's really not, because
It's not.
it
It's
keeps
3
going.
issues. Yeah. Well, and I'll say, I think the issue with the jumping around really is only because I have to write recaps for the show. When I'm reading it, I definitely like don't mind it at all. It's very just like typical. I'm reading a comic book. I think it's just that added extra thing that I always have on my mind when I have to do this show. It's just like, that just adds a little more of like, what do I do? Like later on, I think it was for 87, I just ended up writing all the certain parts together and
Hmm.
then just like clumping the other parts because it was just too much. They're just jumping around a lot. And as for the art, there's actually that I do like that. I like the conversation you were talking about where they're intercutting Paul and Peter and Jill and MJ. And if on page 13 they actually like draw Jill as MJ,
Hmm.
which was a really like that's a strange art mistake, because that top panel where she's talking about him doing something stupid, that's just MJ, but it's supposed to be Jill. So that kind of took me out too. I don't know if that's a coloring issue or an everybody issue, but since they do look pretty much the exact
Mm-hmm.
same, I can see how that happened. And they just got confused. It's definitely not the first time, and it won't be the last time that coloring mistakes or whatever will affect, just give you confusion during a comic book. And just because I feel like I have to mention it because I like Billy Walters a lot, he's in this issue for 2 seconds. So all the Billy fans, he's there, and he's sure to say like a sentence.
It's interesting because again, like he's not a Peter Parker Spider-Man character, so it's
Yeah,
interesting when they kind of bleed out, because again, of this time, editorial was doing a good job, I would say, of keeping every book feeling distinct and like a different part of Peter's life generally. So you had like different casts, but not in a way that felt like too much. It just felt like, yeah, this guy has a lot of different aspects of his life. We're happy to see different slices, and I was kind of appreciated that. Yeah, so I like seeing him as well. I did clock that.
yeah. I like when they do the crossover because yeah, you do have your cast where like Billy and the neighbors are the sensational characters, and Jill and Paul are this book's characters, and
Mm-hmm.
Betty, Flash, and all the Jamesons are the characters in Spectacular and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
I do appreciate this is very classic comics. Like, the Friends of Humanity are really obsessed with Paul like betraying them, so they're going to
Yeah.
send like not just any hired goons, but like super powered goons. But like that's such a comic book thing. Like it doesn't really make any sense, but it runs the plot. That's what you needed to do.
Right. They also chose like the worst super powered villain to choose like at this
They're
time. Like,
affordable.
yeah. So they didn't want to go all out, but then they end up hiring two people, which I'm sure they could have used the cost of two people to hire one person. But yeah, no, I do like how it's just he's so
interesting too
obsessed with
that
just getting rid of him.
you have this like pumped up version of Shocker, but they don't mention it at all on the page, but they do in the next issue. So it's
Yeah.
almost like, the artist gave them something, but it's like too late to add anything. I'll just mention it next time because it's not the Shocker we're used to. Even the visual effects, like the green is not really typically a Shocker effect either. Like it's very very different than what we're used to. And at least with JRJR, it feels like he takes it to a more natural conclusion and kind of does more stuff with it. And like, okay, now it makes more sense. But here it just kind of feels like out of nowhere.
It looks like he has like smoke powers with the green effect to me. But yeah, it sure is explained next issue. Yeah, I mean, it's just a nice filler issue, I guess, of Peter Parker Spider-Man. Usually we do a rating out of 10. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. It's just for me keeping track. But in terms of number wise, I'd probably give it like a 6.5. It's like not the worst thing ever, but it's a book. That's my very like
I think
baseline
so.
rating.
When I used to write comic reviews, I remember that I used to break it down by art and story, and then like an aggregate. So if I was doing it like on that, I think I would give it like a 3.5 or 3 for story and like a 2 for art. So it would probably be like a 5, 5.5.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think that's super fair. All right, so we're back with our normal crew next issue, thankfully, which I will get to. I also say that JR does the covers
I feel like I owe
to all of these too.
I feel like I owe an apology to Andy Smith.
No, it's fine. Oh my gosh, the amount of times we have like ragged on artists or whatever on this show is I always do feel a little bad because art is subjective, but I'm like notoriously mean to Josh Hood, so sorry Josh Hood if you ever listen to this show. That first issue of Sensational after the Clone Saga was rough, but he did well in the holiday special. I do like that story a lot. Peter Parker 86, which has, I like that the cover is just, it just says falling. It's just fun. This is The Span of Years. It was released on October 15th of 1997 with Howard Mackey, of course, John Romita Jr. returning. Art Thibert or Scott Hanna on inks. The cover says one thing. And Gregory Wright is back on our normal colors. So, here we go. Back with the John Romita Jr. goodness, we open on an extraordinary set of pages as Peter reflects on what he lost at the Brooklyn Bridge, and how he won't let that event be repeated for the 100th time in the past couple years. Paul blames Spidey for Gwen's death, and he can get in line. Pete has spent years playing her death over and over in his head, thinking of how things could have ended differently. He couldn't save her, but he can save Paul. On ground level, the Shocker's back to finish the job he started. In Queens, we get the return of Ben Reilly's old roommate, Jimmy Six. He's been cornered by some mobsters, but not his father's, someone else. Jimmy makes quick work of them, no sweat. With the Stacy family, MJ went home with Jill. Jill repeats her issues with Paul as the doorbell rings. It's the mailman with a package for Arthur. He signs for it, and whatever's inside shocks him. At the bridge, Spidey saves Paul as the Shocker begins his assault. He's leveled up, though, and Pete isn't able to take him down easily. Shocker's no pushover, and has upgraded his gloves to radiate some sort of shock field around his body. With Spidey on his knees, Shocker prepares for the killing blow. Once the spider is dead, Shocker can charge top dollar for his services. Paul is offended that this is all about money and is knocked off the bridge by Shocker. In our second Stacy Bridge recreation of this issue, Pete fires the web shot and saves Paul. On the ground, Paul tries to run away from all this, but he and Spidey are stuck together by the paste of the TRAPSTER. no longer Paste Pot Pete. Fleeing from the mobsters, Jimmy was injured in an explosion. Seeking refuge, he goes to the home of Peter Parker, Ben Reilly's cousin. Bleeding and with a shotgun in hand, he sits and waits as MJ and Jill return. I love Jimmy 6, so I'm just very biased towards that in general.
Yeah, I really like Jimmy Six. I will say the one thing that bugs me the most about this issue is we've seen so many different times when Peter has wondered how he would do things differently with Gwen. In the Clone Saga, we saw that,
Yeah.
right? Like the Gwen clone fell, and he's like, I know to use my momentum now. I'm not just going to use the web line. And yet that's exactly what he does here. I'm like, come on, Howard. Come
Well,
on.
it's crazy because we see it twice in the Clone Saga because Ben does it
Mm-hmm.
in 118. So it's like we've had this happen probably like 4 or 5 times in the past 3 years. So it's a little, derivative, and unfortunately it doesn't stop there because it kind of still happens over the course of time. But
For
I mean,
sure.
especially like almost two in this issue alone is a little overkill.
I just don't understand if you're going to use that homage, which is fine, at least make it feel more different. Like, not even different, but like the whole point of the other ones was he's learned from his mistake and that he wouldn't do it the same and he would use his momentum to jump down and save the person. And yet here he does exactly what he did to Gwen, which we've seen multiple times him saying, I wouldn't do it that way anymore. I've learned from this. So it just felt like Howard, and this is something they get into in the Life of Riley archives, that at times Howard wasn't the best continuity man. And so
Yeah.
this definitely felt like kind of showing that up, that, he's not necessarily as student of things that have happened, even though it's only been a couple of years ago, at this point, since the last time they'd done this. So it really stuck out to me as like well, that doesn't feel like what Peter would do. He's learned his lesson. This big thing that happened in his life that he's run over in his mind, even just in this issue, he would not do the same thing. Anyways, it's just, I'll get off my soapbox about it, but it really bugged me.
No, I think you're entirely in the right for complaining about it because it does. I mean, continuity, especially at this time, is honestly my favorite part of a lot of these books because most of the time the creators don't forget the Clone Saga, but I guess, sometimes they can forget one or two little things that kind of derail everything. But in a way, it does just get old, just flat out with something like that, especially because I mean that was Web 125, so that was Terry's last book, and in my mind, with Terry and Howard being the besties that they are, I feel like he would read his work and remember it, but I mean, I don't know what anybody was reading back when they were writing it. They were pretty much just, on the grind writing the Clone Saga. But definitely would have been nice to, because like you're saying, this situation could happen. It's just the wording. Like he doesn't have to think, oh, I can finally make up for it. I can finally save a Stacy. Because you have. And even if it's not Gwen, you've saved countless other people this exact same way, even in this book, by saving Paul the first time. Obviously not in the exact same way, but still saving him from falling off a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on and kind of talking about the art of this issue, this is such a grungy book. I don't know. They went, Greg Wright went kind of like crazy on the dirt this issue. And I think that's one of the things I like about Peter Parker is it really is. I mean, for a while, it kind of stops being this way, but it's the gang book for that last little bit of the Clone Saga and into this before we just switch focus entirely to Norman. But I do like just how dirty and grungy everything kind of looks. There's not a single page that's really bright except for Shocker doing stuff. I mean, even in like the Stacy home, it's just dark with pink rugs. But I really like that double page with like the goblin head and Gwen falling. It's just like really great. It's what JR is kind of best at, especially because it's in the rain and now he's in his in the rain period.
Absolutely. It's interesting. In some ways, I appreciate that we read the issue before this because I had forgotten how important the colors of Wright were to this period. Because in my mind, I just think, well, JR in this period is amazing. But really, as you're saying, like Gregory Wright adds so much depth to what JR is doing here. And it really helps kind of bring the moment alive. Like that first page where you have the rain slicking, you have, the Gwen ghost, you have Spider-Man kind of, reaching forward. That is an amazing shot that I would just put on a poster. Like he's not even doing anything Spider-Man, but you feel that moment. You feel like there's something going on. There's just so much happening. Again, you have all the rain effects. No one does rain like John Romita Jr. Like when he is on and doing rain, like just no one can top that. But again, from the last issue, no rain at all. Suddenly the wettest day of New York. Like it's just,
Yeah.
the internal continuity there does not speak to each other, unfortunately. Again, this was back in the day where you probably weren't reading the issues back to back. You're reading it literally 30 days later and you don't have trades. Well, you still don't have this material, but you're just picking up the issues sporadically, so you wouldn't really maybe notice it as much. But yeah, no, this is Gregory Wright is adding so much and doing so much to make this book even more enjoyable. And as you said, kind of really grounds it, because if you look at the other Spider books at the time, they all have very different feels, not just because they have different artists, but because the color theory is so different on them. So this one definitely feels, as you said, this is the grimy, grungy crime book, and it sets it apart. And again, this is a very specific world that Spider-Man, traipses through. And then in the other ones, you have like an amazing, you have ninjas, but it's much more refined, and the colors are more, they jump out at you more, and it's more, it's just Joe Bennett doing other things.
I think what's great about Greg specifically is he's also main colorist on Sensational at this time. So it's like polar opposites, where this is dirty and Sensational is Mike Ringo Spider-Man jumping around like Ditko Spider-Man, flopping everywhere. And it's the brightest book I've ever seen in my life. And even then, like there are some dark, grungy like panels and stuff in that book, especially in the last arc that I covered with the Technomancers and the whatever they're the weird demon gremlin guy, where everything's kind of weird and screwy. But yeah, he really is a fantastic colorist. I mean, all the colorists of this time, everybody that's on their books is perfect for their main art team. And whenever someone fills in with a different team, it just kind of, it loses the momentum. But thankfully, next issue they kind of pick back up on it. And I'm sure that J.R. was probably doing the art of this book while the other one was also in production, because typically that's whenever they're taking a month off, it's so they can have a little more time to catch up.
That's true.
And
It's
who
interesting.
knows?
One thing I've talked about a lot on my podcast, and probably too much, but I've talked about how, as much as I like that there's obviously much more modern things you can do with coloring these days, there's something about the limitations of the four color process that I find actually aesthetically is more pleasing to my eye, and why I kind of like going back to 70s, 80s, 90s comics. Even when 90s comics start doing more digital coloring, it's not to the sense that it is now. They can do more now. There's more depth, but there's also almost a sameness, and I can't explain it. It's almost because there's something about the garishness, or the fact that they had a limited palette before, that made the book stand out more. And so you had more vibrant characters that kind of jumped off pages because they didn't have, they weren't able to use the same type of gradients. They weren't able to use more things that weren't such a big difference. And I'm not using the word right. There's a word that's escaping me, but there's just something very different about it. And so looking back at these comics, they really touch a sweet spot because they haven't moved into using, computer separations and as much of that stuff on these comics. They're still doing traditional four color process, and I really enjoy that.
I think that's kind of the beauty of people that collect color guides, especially like since this is kind of the last era of that. Whenever you see the color guides for these books, I see them for sale all the time. It's just crazy that someone just took their watercolors and
Yeah.
went at it, and it's extremely impressive on how everything turns out. As for the overall plot of this book, it's just kind of more of the same, following what's happening with Paul. I think I'm kind of at the point with Paul in this time period where I'm just kind of ready to be done with him. After this, he's still here, but not nearly as in the spotlight. We kind of just switched to Jill, being a forced romantic interest. But with Paul, he's got this deep dark secret, and from my knowledge, we never learn his deep dark secret. And again, just some more of that stuff that kind of goes nowhere with the people going after Jimmy Six. That kind of really doesn't go anywhere either. Follows into the next issue. But I mean, after Spider Hunt, Jimmy just disappears pretty much forever
Yeah, I think
until
so.
apparently he was in some Danny Ketch book that Mackie wrote for Marvel a couple years ago.
Oh,
But
okay.
I don't,
Sure.
because they were doing that in the same vein of like the Ben Reilly Spider-Man stuff, like when they were set in the time periods. But when
Oh,
I was going
okay.
through appearances, I was double checking myself, and yeah, just kind of floats off into the nothingness, sadly. But it's really great to see him here. I do like a lot of that like weird crime stuff, and I think
he
it's
he does feel like he's in his own book. Like he's
yeah,
just like he's not. He never crisscrosses with Peter, and even when he crisscrosses with Peter's like family, like I don't think there's ever any discussion anywhere like, "Hey, remember when you guys, were stuck in the house with Jimmy Six?" Like I don't think it ever comes up. I could be
no,
wrong.
I think you're right. I don't think it goes anywhere, and even with what happens next issue, which we'll get to. I mean, there's this whole plot with him and like this tattoo and like all this stuff, and
Well,
it
yeah.
quite literally just goes nowhere. Because the next time we see him, it's Spider Hunt, and he just wants to kill the Green Goblin.
But
Um,
I'll be honest, I was still enthralled because
oh
I
no, absolutely!
because I love the character,
It's
and there's
so
something.
visceral too with the art. It's just the way that everything moves and what Jimmy represents, especially as a tie to the previous clone stuff. It's nice to just to see it.
And I think that's what people often forget who don't really remember this period, because during this period they were allowed to mention Ben. Like the Clone Saga wasn't off the table. Like you have in Identity Crisis when he puts on the hoodie and is like, "Oh, this is like kind of like Ben's hoodie." Like there's nods, there's mentions. You see some of the same cast members. Like it's only after the relaunch when it's like no one ever mentions clones ever again. Over in the X-Men world, like when they reveal that Joseph is essentially a clone, they go out of their way to use every word but clone, because clone was such a toxic word at Marvel at that point. They're like, we cannot use this word. And it was like over a decade before you'd ever see any mention of Ben anywhere in Spider-Man comics, which is just crazy. But but this is before that embargo, so you actually get to feel like the Clone Cycle wasn't just this weird pocket that happened that we're never going to talk about. It still feels like it matters, and that it was an impactful moment in this character's life, which makes sense. It's just so unfortunate that afterwards Marvel's like, nope, no clones, no mention, pretend this never happened.
I always say, as you know, and how everybody knows, the Clone Saga is my favorite thing ever. Just in general, like there's nothing that I like more than the Clone Saga, whether it be comics or movies or whatever. So like the fact that this time period, I always say that my favorite thing is that they don't forget the Clone Saga. And every other issue of Sensational, there's a Ben Reilly mention. In Identity Crisis, you say he uses Ben's stingers when he's the Hornet, and
That's
like
right.
everything is connected. Mackie does a beautiful tribute to the baby in his issue with the cat, and he mentions Ben Reilly in the following issues. So it is all there, and they don't forget it. I think the thing that works so well about it is that everybody writing at this time wrote the Clone Saga, so they're not going to be like, at
Mm-hmm.
least Ralph was nice enough, and so was Bob Harris, to be like, you guys can still mention it. It's fine, because I don't think that they wanted to waste 2.5 years on nothing and then never mention it again. So at least giving it until 99, they had a little bit of time to be like, here's 4 years of us talking about the Clone Saga, and then bye bye Clone Saga,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate, but I do love that all the callbacks and stuff.
One other one to point out is the was it Spectacular 241, which is all them just dealing with the fact that like they had this stillborn. Like
Yeah.
I've talked with JMD about it, and I've just been like, as someone who had gone through like miscarriages with my wife, like that was a really, like, it meant more now having gone through something like that to read it now. But even at the time, I could connect with it and be like, this is, because he handled it with such grace, and it was like, let's give this moment room to breathe. Now, obviously, they don't really talk about it after that for the most part, but at least there was one issue where they're like, we're going to deal with it. We're going to let this, be something we talk about, and then we'll move on to, the adventures we're used to seeing. But at least they did take up one moment, one issue to really delve into it and let that loss permeate the character, but also knowing we don't want to sit with the loss. We got to move on. Because they don't want the character to be saddled with, which is interesting, right? He keeps getting saddled with these things, and they're like, well, marriage is too far. I'm like, we gave him a stillborn child. Like, what do you
Yeah.
think is going to age you up more? But, I digress.
Yeah. Might have been easier just to actually, kidnap the baby or something and not kill it. But imagine that, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's, I mean, 241 is a beautiful book. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that might be, I don't remember what I gave it, but I think that's almost a perfect comic book. Like,
Mm.
especially if you like read it and ignore like the setup stuff with Jack-o'-lantern and just focus on Pete and MJ in terms of their relationship. It's such a wonderful book. And then there's a mention in Sensational during um the Savage Land stuff where there's like a dead child that had to be buried, and Peter
Mm.
just takes a second to stare at its gravestone and completely like zone out. So it's that kind of callback that I really do enjoy in this time period. And what's cool about Jimmy in this book is the last time we've seen him at this point, I think, is before Peter Parker 75, because he wasn't added to that until later. But
Mm.
as these books were releasing, the Revelations trade came out, so we got that great, the epilogue, the wake for Ben. So like it's cool that those were happening at the same time, where we have that appearance of him. So if you pick that up, which I don't know if too many people did, but now everybody's read it because it's the only version they republish. Uh, and then you pick this up, it's like, oh, well, there's that guy again. I sure hope something happens with him.
Yeah, it is really weird to me to read those collected editions now because, again, I remember what the original published version was like. So I can always very much like point to, well, that wasn't one of the originals. You can tell. If the art's not quite the same, it's a little sketchier, but it is interesting. You're right; it just kind of gets folded into the historical record, so that most people would not know that that's not part of the original comic as presented.
Yeah, that was one of the things. I don't know how much or have delved into my stuff, but I do this thing called Project Rescan. I scanned all the missing issues from this time period for all those books, just so there were like high resolution versions to read, because all the old scans are really bad for people that read digitally or don't have access to the comic shop. It's kind of a great option. And when I scanned 75 because there's no version of that digitally, the original version. And
Mm.
I was posting about it, and so many people don't know. Like even people either don't know the trade exists or don't know the original exists. And I think it's a really interesting divide of who knows what. Because
Mm-hmm.
I did this whole like comparison thing on Instagram, not really Twitter, but it was really interesting to see all the people that read it when it came out going, there's a trade version, because they've never read a collected edition of the Clone Saga and never realized that's the version that's been republished. So they
Mm-hmm.
just have those original colors in their mind, and people have
What
their
was it?
preference.
How did you first experience that?
I read it in the trades, so I read the epilogue. Yeah. So that was something I didn't learn about until a little later when I was buying the single issues, where because I mean, I first read that, I'm trying to think when Ben Reilly Volume 6 came out. That trade, it was probably 2012, 2013, I think. So I read it around then, kind of like, I didn't read the entire Clone Saga like back to back to back to back until around 2016. So I was 15 at that time, just turning 16.
God, you're making me feel old.
Yeah,
Jesus.
but yeah. So it was kind of an interesting thing. But when I had the like DK guide to Spider-Man growing up,
Mm.
and that uses those original pages versus the recolors. So because I guess that's just what they had access to easily. So I always got both, because you would Google search or whatever, and there'd be both. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting divide of people that know one or the other. And when I met Ralph, so when I met Howard and John Romita Jr., I asked them about those pages. They had no idea what I was talking about, which was really funny to me. They were like, oh, I don't remember doing that at all. So thankfully, Ralph was able to give me the answers of like why they did it. So that's cool. I'm happy about
Because
that.
they
Because
wanted people to have a reason to buy the trade, right?
yes, it was a reason to buy the trade, and also because they felt it wasn't the conclusion it should have been. Because the colors were rushed and all that stuff. So I don't think. I mean, Howard and John might have been happy with it, but I don't think that editorial was. Um, but sidetracking is great. I don't mind it, but I'm trying to speed a little bit since I know you have some stuff to do. But this is a great book. I really enjoy all the stuff with Jimmy, the stuff with Peter Paul, and the reintroduction of the Trapster. Trapster becomes a really big character here in a
Mm-hmm.
few. Him being here is it's kind of silly that he's taken so seriously at this point, or I say taken seriously loosely, because Peter really doesn't. But in terms of the book itself, it gets a little serious. But I really enjoyed this issue. I don't know about you.
I know. I thought honestly, I thought this was great. I thought it was a lot of fun. I'd probably give it like an 8.5. I think the art is just supremely on point. Is it doing a giant story? No, it's simple. It's Shocker's got Spider-Man, and he really has a grudge against him, and he wants to make him pay, and that happens sometimes with the villains becoming so monofocused on Spider-Man, and that's what we get here. And at the same time, he's trying to save Paul, who really does not appreciate it in any way. You're building up to the next issue with Jimmy 6, and he's having his own adventure, and which is again very much in JRJR's wheelhouse. At times he almost feels like the Punisher from Warzone, like the kind of the thick face and the extra kind of bulky body. So no, I was all for this. This was a lot of fun.
So yeah, I totally agree. I would also give it about like an 8 out of 10. So big fan of this one. I'm happy with how it's going. So Peter Parker 87, titled "Enemies: A Love Story," was released on November 26th of 1997 with our usual folks of Mackie, John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and Gregory Wright. Peter and Paul are stuck together with no easy way out. Scaling buildings, Pete vents about everything going wrong recently. The Osborne tapes, constant beatings he's taken, and being glued to someone who despises him. What a great time. The two help each other to the top of another building when it comes crashing down by the Trapster. In the wreckage, we get a great splash page, pseudo-homage, of Pete using his free arm to lift rubble. Realizing that Paul isn't breathing, Spidey almost gives Paul mouth-to-mouth, but Paul wakes up. They navigate their way through the sewer system and hope to make it to ESU so they can make something to dissolve the paste. Paul asks Spidey why he's helping him after the damage Spider-Man caused to the Stacy family, but Pete just blows it off for the time being. At ESU, they begin to make a solvent as Paul begins to insult Spidey's intelligence. Not having any more of it, Pete gets angry and pins Paul. He insists that he didn't kill Gwen or George and that he loved them more than Paul could know. The two's argument is interrupted by Shocker's blasts. They get to the roof, where they are glued down by Trapster again. Trapster's pager goes off, and both he and Shocker are forced to retreat. They were offered double the money to leave the two alive. Business is business. At the home of Donovan Zane, a mystery man has killed many of the friends of humanity and assures Zane that Mr. Osborn appreciates his cooperation in the matter. And now for Jimmy's story. Jimmy takes MJ, Anna, and Jill as hostages, though he says otherwise, in their own home, not allowing them phone access and worried that whoever is after Jimmy will find him there. Anna goes to the kitchen to get some food and sees a man with a gun through the window. Jimmy protects Anna and MJ, but Jill is hit by a stray bullet. Jimmy finds the shooter, who kills himself before Jimmy can get any answers. But he also has a red Goblin tattoo, something Jimmy doesn't recognize. On his way out, he tells MJ that the shooter wasn't after him and that she should be careful. And there's your conclusion.
So I have a quick comment. So we talked a lot about giving Gregory Wright a lot of love for the previous issue. I still think he does a good job here, but it is interesting that the previous issue made such use of rain and the effects, and now there's no rain at all, so it's all stopped. And honestly, it does make the pages almost feel more bare, and not like there's just so much happening before because you had wind effects and rain effects, and it felt like there was so much going on. This almost feels, I'm not going to say boring, but it feels very different because you don't have any of that. And if the issue before hadn't had rain, I probably wouldn't have thought anything about it. But because you had such a detail-rich issue, this one feels less so. And I think it's obviously a combination of what JRJR is putting on the page and also how Gregory Wright is coloring it. But it did feel kind of a step down, that there was a lot of kind of blank space behind them, where before we were kind of getting obscured rain effects that detracted from the fact that there wasn't a lot going on behind some of these characters. generally speaking, I think the flow of the issue is still fun. I love the Jimmy Six stuff. There's something about him being on screen. I just want to see more of him. So he's really fun. Shocker, it's interesting. He was played off as being a lot bigger in the previous issue. And then here he looks kind of small again. I don't know if I really cared for the interplay between him and the Trapster, but the idea of having Peter attached to someone he doesn't like, a la, he's done that with J. Jonah Jameson before, so this definitely felt like that. So this felt very Spider-Man, like, let's put you with someone who hates you, and you're on the run, and you're trying to survive. So, I mean, in that way, I really appreciated it, and in some ways, more than the previous issue, because now that they're literally trapped to each other, and they're stuck to each other, they cannot do anything about it. There's no way that they can separate, so just seeing them having to deal with that is kind of fun. I do wish that Paul hadn't been such a dick the entire time. I thought maybe they could have had him soften right near the end, but unfortunately that was not going to happen. And then right near the end, one of the panels when they're at ESU, I don't know why Wright used that kind of red that he doesn't use anywhere else in the entire issue, but I really like the red. There's just something really haunting about it. I guess it's because maybe the spider light is on and they're trying to, not turn on the lights. I'm not sure if that's maybe what this is supposed to be, but it's really eerie, but also really adds something to the severity of the moment.
It certainly fits the tone of the whole, I did not kill these people. And Peter snaps, and the red really, represents that. And I think it's cool. This is a very like internet thing. People love when Peter Parker snaps. Like, it's like some people's favorite thing ever is Peter Parker getting angry. But I like when it's something like this, where, yeah, he's just pissed off that this guy will not shut up. He just keeps berating him of two of his biggest like regrets, two of his greatest failures that he's constantly harping on himself for. So it's just like, I don't need any more from you, sir. And I like that it's kind of like, oh, Paul blames me for the Stacys. Join the club. I also blame myself for the Stacys, despite everyone saying it's not my fault and me having to grieve and work through it. But in terms of the coloring, I think it really just kind of it throws me off because I don't know what time of day this is, because we have no rain, heavy rain, it's super dark, and now it's kind of like starting to get brighter. So are they fighting through the night, or is it, I don't know. For me, that just kind of is a little disorienting. I know in the grand scheme that doesn't matter at all, but as I'm reading it, I'm just kind of a little more lost. I think my favorite moments in these issues are, of course, the stuff with Jimmy. It just feels like an entirely different comic. Like, it's not Spider-Man at all. It just happens to have these three Spider-Man supporting characters. While I understand why Jimmy would go to the Parker household, I don't think he would. Just like basing it off of kind of like, he doesn't know these people really. He kind of knows them by extension, and getting them involved in like a gang thing at all, or even the threat of it, I don't know. I guess he's just not thinking. He's very mobster mindset, so who knows? Was very inconsiderate to Ben Reilly too, in a way, but they were friends with it, with that problem. I like the page where Trapster and Shocker are called off. While I don't necessarily have a deep attachment to either of those characters, I just think it's really funny that the pager goes off and they're just like, "Is that you? Is it me?" Because no one knows. They're in the moment, like ready to kill these two men, and immediately have to walk away. So it's just kind of a comical thing. That's one of those, like, it's written that way specifically for that moment, because there are so many times in movies and television and comics where you're like, why is the character in this situation? Like, Spider-Man has fought these people 100 times. How is he going to get stuck in the Trapster's goop on the top of a building and then almost get murdered? But it's just so we can have this funny gag where they walk away.
I was going to say, I love that moment. He's like,
Yeah.
"Shut up! I've got a plan." And the next panel, they've left their boots and their shoes there. I think that's really funny.
I think it's great too, and that's one of those things that I think really works in this medium. And when you have a writer that's good at those type of moments, it kind of shines through. But then we get our mystery man on the last page, who may or may not love shotguns. Is all I'm gonna say. But yeah, no, it's another. It's a little bit of the classic Mackie rush the conclusion book. He does a lot of that in these couple issue stories where it's like we kind of have a slow beginning, a slow middle, and then the end is like boom, 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 the end.
Mm-hmm.
Which in some cases I think can benefit a book, and in other cases I think it can really hurt it. Here, I'm kind of in the middle, where overall it's just kind of a filler story to get us where we want to go anyway, and do a little bit more work with Paul. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty indifferent to the whole thing.
He's lucky that he even has like 22 pages. Like these days,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have that many, and he still has that. One thing, actually, I should say, just as a small aesthetic, but something I always appreciate, is that in these issues, you do have page numbers at the bottom,
Yeah.
in the spider eye. I really like that. It's such a little touch, and I guess maybe in some pages you could say maybe it's getting in the way, but like I never felt that way, and I kind of like having that there. I can kind of say I can kind of check my pacing, see where I'm at. It sounds really dumb, but there's something really small but enjoyable about that.
I really appreciate it because it's easier to like call back on something,
It's
especially in a
better for podcasting.
yes, I'm saying like in a format like this, it's perfect because I can be like, oh, on page whatever, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and doing the page count. But
Hmm.
I had a great time with this specific 3 issue story. Just fun with the John Romita stuff and the hokey shenanigans, and the classic almost beat a dead horse Gwen Stacy stuff. But even then, I mean, I didn't hate it. I had a good time reading it, and pretty much any time I can experience these books again, it gives me that warm fuzzy feeling. And I like the Peter trapped underground, almost giving Paul mouth to mouth as another great like comedy moment. I guess that's because I mean the title of the book is very strange this issue, but they had to throw
It,
something in there.
it is interesting though because that kind of moment with the attempted CPR does feel like a weird kind of 90s gay panic kind of moment that I don't know if they'd even bother with these days. Like I think
Yeah,
that feels very of the time. They'd be like, oh, whoa, 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 like, and I think that's just not where we're at anymore. But it's
yeah.
interesting to kind of see that feels very of the time.
That's another thing that's been is nice about reading older books like that, where yeah, it's just some things are very rooted in its time period, and that is
Hmm.
certainly one of those things. Overall, I think I would give this one probably like a 7, like in the middle of all of them.
Hmm.
And I really love the Jimmy stuff, so I think a lot of that just kind of makes that number higher.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think I would give it a 7 as well.
Cool. All right, let's get to the real meat and potatoes of this episode.
Okay.
Buddy's favorite issue ever, Peter Parker Spider-Man number 88. That's actually not true, but this is definitely one of my favorite single issues from this time period. Um, Big fan of this one. Plus, I mean, just to start, the cover. I don't know. There's not a lot of like really great white covers that I can like think of in my mind,
Hmm.
and just the fact that this is 90% white and the black Spider-Man logo, that's also something that I don't think is seen a lot, especially not at this time period. They're always changing the colors, but black with blue, there's just something about it. Makes the eyes happy.
It's interesting because we've dropped the corner box too, right? Like so.
Yeah, the art box, right? Did they have it last issue? Yeah, they
Yeah,
did.
in the
Yeah.
last one they had like and everything felt bigger, but you also have that corner box, and so now you don't have that, and it really does free up the real estate, even though they're not actually doing anything with it per se, but it's the lack of anything there, and just having that kind of that snow effect, which is so arresting. So I think if you had something else on the masthead, it just wouldn't work.
Yeah. And especially I mean with John Mayer Jr. being the rain guy, now he's the snow guy.
You know what? He can do snow too. Who knew?
Yeah. He can do everything. He's John Romita Jr.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Peter Parker Spider-Man number 88, Who Did Joey Z? Was released on December 17th of 1997 with our same cast of creatives.
I gotta say, in my head, I had retroactively thought it said "Who killed Joey Zed." I always thought that
Yeah,
was what the issue was called, and
who
so I went back
did?
and I'm like, "Who did? Really?"
Yeah, I guess they're going with like who did him in, but it's a very strange title, I think. Just overall when you don't have like who did Joey Z in.
It could be asking a very different question.
Yeah, that's where my mind went to.
Comics Code Authority, we got to be clean.
That's true. We're still in that time period.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It's a snowy night in Manhattan as another one of Spidey's classic criminal web-ups hangs from a stoplight. The officers on duty get the hands of a newly promoted Detective Snipes to book the criminal, but when he's cut down, it's discovered that the man is dead, and Spider-Man killed him. Pete is called to the scene along with Ben Urich and Jonah. Of course, Norman also arrives at the scene, spouting about how if people heeded Jonah's warnings long ago, this would have never happened. While standing next to Peter, Norman goes on and on about how vigilantism is ruining their city, and that Spider-Man must never be allowed to show his face again. Walking home, Peter knows Norman has to be behind the murder somehow. Just then, his spider sense goes off, and he looks up, seeing the Green Goblin at the top of the building. Determined to put an end to Osborn, Pete rushes to the roof, only to find a lone pumpkin bomb. He throws it into the sky and watches it explode as the police arrive on the roof. They take a shot at Peter in his Spidey outfit as he hops off the roof and escapes. MJ and Peter spend the next morning at the Daily Grind discussing Pete's plan, or lack thereof, for clearing his name. Mary Jane mentions that Arthur Stacy is a PI, but Peter shoots down the idea. Just then, the Goblin appears again outside. Pete runs into the snow, but the Goblin is already gone by the time he gets there. With only one way to deal with Norman, Pete gives a visit to Osborn Industries. It's truly from here onward that solidifies this as one of my favorite single issues of the era. Pete asks what Norman wants, and Norman answers that he simply wants Peter to know that there's nothing he can do to stop him. Norman wants Peter ruined, just like Peter ruined his son. A little later, inside an elevator, the power goes out. Norman tells his men to prepare for the worst as Spider-Man rips Osborn from the elevator. Wanting to be away from all the cameras, Pete takes Norman to the roof. Norman makes a point of constantly reiterating how predictable Peter is and how easy it is to press his buttons. Norman jumps off the roof, leading Peter to jump and save him. Again, how predictable. Norman says how he'd have let Peter die, and that Peter has always been a loser, and that he'll never win. Osborn's guards meet them at the ground, and Pete swings away, seeing the Goblin right after. So if it's not Norman, who is it? P.S. We'll never know. At the police department, Spidey shoots some webs into the detective's coffee, and Spidey insists that they do an analysis of the webs compared to whatever killed Joey Z, and swings away. Falling desperate, Peter goes to the home of Arthur Stacy and asks for his help. And there we have it. Peter Parker 88. I just love how the Peter and Norman interactions are written, because it's very, like, we see Norman do nefarious things at this point in Spectacular Spider-Man, where Norman has spent most of his time. But here they're just like one-on-one. Like a lot of, 250 really is the Norman Osborn book, like Spec 250, and there's a lot of the nefarious, like, evil Norman during that book. Talking to Liz and talking to Peter later on. But here, when it's like that one-on-one, just like, Peter, you are worthless. You cannot win. You'll never win. I just want to kill you. That's all I want, is I want to humiliate you and I want to kill you. And I think it's just great. And it's really in this time period where Norman Osborn becomes that, like, super threat to Peter Parker. Because, obviously he's responsible for the death of Gwen Stacy and, unmasked him long ago. But in terms of, like, pure evil, it's just like this time period is just the evil Norman Osborn. He will do anything to get back at Peter and his family. It's no holds bar. And I really just love the dialogue between the two, and the scene when they're called to the crime. And Norman's just going on and getting, the support of Jonah, who of course wants Spider-Man done for, so he's all for it, and just side-eyeing Peter the entire time. It's so good, especially with JR's art. I love the way he draws the two of them too, where they're kind of like, Norman is so, like, broad-shouldered and tall and ready to fight, but he doesn't have to. And I think that's the greatest part, is that most of the fighting or pretty much all the fighting that Norman does here and in this time period is done just through pure manipulation. And I think it's just so great.
Yeah, the pacing and the atmosphere of this issue is off the charts. Like it feels extremely well paced. And I think part of this, and it's interesting having read the previous three issues, there's no interludes. It's just Peter on screen all time, experiencing different things throughout his day, but there's just an A story. There's no B story. It's just this one thing. So Howard Mackey is able to kind of settle in and tell one consistent story. He's not setting up anything else. He's technically setting up an event, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like he's just telling a story, and you're like, what is going to happen next? So the pacing's on point. Again, the atmosphere, Gregory Wright's colors are brilliant. The page where Peter's sleeping and like MJ, gets the phone and then is like, you got to go. Like, there's just something to that moment. First of all, it feels very natural. Like, she's like, I've got it, hero. He's like, thanks. I'm a lucky guy, like half asleep. Like, that feels like a real moment. That feels like a very authentic thing. And then, he's got to go. Something bad has happened. He ends up in this car in the middle of the night with J. Jonah Jameson and Urich on the way to a crime scene. Everything about the panel work feels claustrophobic in a good way, that he's just being kind of crowded out by this. That moment you talk about where Norman's just grandstanding and going on, and you have these tight, ever tightening shots on Peter's face, and even the colors are almost otherworldly. Like it's the reflected green from Norman, even though he's not wearing the mask. You almost feel like he is because of the kind of the shades of green on Peter's face. Like this is just a masterclass, and there's so many moments here that I remember seeing as a kid and being like, I like just when he throws the pumpkin bomb, and then you have that shot of him just like freaking out on the roof, like
on the rooftop.
You can feel the emotion there. That shot where he's running through the snow, thinking he's going to find Norman and he's not there. That it's just Peter, but Peter's looking pissed and angry, and you feel something for that because you're not used to seeing Peter like that. You're used to seeing Spider-Man's face being angry, but not actually seeing Peter's face. So there's something to that. When he goes to confront Norman, the shadows on Norman's face, feeling very diabolical. When he throws him onto the roof, you have this great shot of Peter. It's kind of an up angle from behind Norman, and you just have Spider-Man standing there, kind of ready to grapple. That's a fantastic moment as well. I'd love that on a poster. Like there's so many moments here, and even the very end, the fact that you've had this other character, this Arthur Stacy character, and finally him and Spider-Man are finally going to talk to each other. Like even that feels like a big moment. Like I need your help. And then Arthur not shooing him away, but just saying, let's see what we can do, young man. I've been wanting to speak to you for some time. Like it just feels like so much is happening. And when you get to the very end, you're like, I want to read more. I want to read what happens next. I want to know where this goes because this opening salvo is so strong.
It is super strong, and you're talking the splash that you're talking about when they're on the roof. I love that, like you were saying, the green reflections. Norman's hand is green, like he's wearing green, and obviously that's a deliberate choice because he's the Green Goblin. But it is just so good, and I used the word visceral for the Jimmy Six stuff last issue, but I mean like here it's intense because like from every panel, everything that JR penciled and Scott inked and Greg colored, it's like this perfect synergy of a single issue where every panel you feel the emotion when he's in the dialogue too. I mean it all just fits perfectly. You can tell Peter is desperate. He just wants this guy gone. I mean you can only take so much before you break. And I mean, a lot of Peter at this time period is him kind of pushing it down, where obviously he's got all this tragedy. He lost his brother, he lost his child, he's lost everything, and now to add insult to injury, the family of the woman this man killed is back in his life, and now the guy's threatening to kill his family all over again. I mean, hasn't Norman done enough? And Peter's just fed up, and I love when he's going up the stairs, he's just like, couldn't he have just stayed dead? Like even vampires have the tendency to stay dead after a while. But it's just so good. I wish I could express how I feel more in words than I am. It really is just a book that you kind of have to see to believe. And thankfully, this one is available on Marvel Unlimited. It was a part of the Spider Hunt trade when it came out all those years ago. Thank God they at least did that. So if someone is interested in Spider Hunt as a whole, I think you kind of read it on its own. There's a little bit of preamble, but they kind of explain what you need to know, especially with this issue being here. And I like that we finally get the payoff of Arthur, because I mean, when Arthur first arrived back in New York in the earlier issues with Ben as Spider-Man, you see him analyzing these photos of Spider-Man, and he wants to talk to Spider-Man. You think that he has some nefarious sort of
Mm.
like purpose, but here they insist like he doesn't blame Spider-Man because, he's into it, but it's time that he just wants the truth, and now he can get his truth while also helping Spider-Man, clear his name. And I do like the working relationship they have in the next few issues, into Identity Crisis and such.
Mm.
Just because I like Arthur Stacey as a character. I think while he hasn't done a whole lot, I think he adds a whole lot, and I think that the -1 issue really
Mm.
helped that, because I mean it's all about him and George, so you get to see really like what he's about and how he's just an honest man who always wants justice and the truth, and I think that it's a great addition to this time period,
Mm-hmm.
when all we have is these two battling of titans, and it all involves Norman, Peter,
Mm-hmm.
and the Stacys. So it really is just kind of like the perfect book to end off this 4-issue run that we're discussing, and also as a great interlude into the insanity that's to come with Spider Hunt. So it's the calm before the storm, even though it's not very calm.
That's true. I mean, and I would love to come back for Spider Hunt because again, that was my first actual crossover I was buying. Like I had been around when the Clone Saga was happening, but once I was buying these books on the regular, there was no cross pollination. They didn't talk to each other. Like they just kind of happened on their own, and it wasn't till Spider Hunt where you actually start to see them come together, which by that point was what, 8 or 9 months in, right? So you had these books kind of doing their own thing, and now they're going to come together for one hell of an event, which I still appreciate.
Yeah, when you had those like every now and then crossovers, it's definitely a lot easier to handle than every part being in a separate book. Imagine that. Um, but yeah, Spider Hunt is an absolute blast, and yeah, I'd be happy to have you back on for that one, because I think that's going to be a really fun discussion. Just overall, it's a great story. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I mean, this book, I don't know, it's a 10 out of 10 for me. I think I just love everything about it. I don't think there's a single issue that I have. The only nitpick is that Peter throws his clothes off in the alleyway and the police just run past him. So I
Yeah.
guess they just think it's some homeless man's clothes on this building.
Yeah, I guess so. That's a good point. Yeah, yeah. It's
So
interesting when you reached out and you're like, I'm doing an episode. Would love a guest. These are the issues. I'm like, well, I mean, I hit the mother load. I got to talk about 88. Like 88 is such a big one for me. And again, it's one of my favorites as well. I'd probably give it a 10 too. I never tire of reading it. I think I only ever get more things out of it. Again, there's some quiet moments. There's bigger moments. There's not a lot of quote unquote action. Like the biggest action is him pulling Norman out of an elevator, but not even doing anything about it, right? So, so much of it is just vibes, I guess is what we would say now, and the vibes are strong in this one, and you just feel Peter's claustrophobia. Like he can't do anything, he can't make this guy stop. And the last time he hit this guy, he was on camera, and now he's paying for it, which is very Spider-Man too. Like when he gives into his impulses, he is brought low by it, by the fact that he let himself feel that way. He has to hold himself to a higher standard, otherwise his life will get worse. Like this is the lesson he has to keep learning. And so here he's just so bottled up, he cannot express this anger, he cannot let it out in the way he wants to, and he's just so stuck, and you feel that, and it makes such an enjoyable tense issue.
yeah, the action is all verbal, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is kind of the best part. When you have a writer that can produce a comic book that doesn't have the punchy all the time, it really is special, because
Mm-hmm.
it kind of differentiates, where you look at this book and every page is captivating and every line of dialogue is captivating. I mean, as a child, I don't know if I would have appreciated that as much, depending on how old I was. The first time I read this book, I was probably like, 16, 17. So
Mm-hmm.
I had a little more appreciation for that sort of storytelling. But I mean, geez, it really is just something really special, and everything just flows so nicely together. I don't know if I
Hmm.
can reiterate that enough, but it is well worth a look if you haven't read it in a while or haven't read it at all somehow and are listening to this. But yeah, I mean that kind of ends our discussion for tonight. I really appreciate you coming on last minute. I had a mix up where my normal guest host was supposed to, or normal co-host was supposed to be on, but he had to back out last second due to some work schedule changes. So I do really appreciate you coming in and filling in. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you. You're so well articulated. I guess doing podcasts for 10 years, does that to a person. Um,
I
but
guess so.
yeah, and I just I appreciate your insight on everything and how familiar and how attached you are to the material. It really helps make this a lot easier for me.
As I said, kind of off podcast when we were messaging earlier, I'm blown away by your love of the characters now that I know how young you are. Because not that you can't love Clone Saga having been born after it, but I'm just not used to seeing it or hearing it. And like I'm part of the Amazing Spider Talk has a Spider Slack, and there's a lot of people there who are also like in their in their early 20s, and that just kind of blows me away hearing what people's first Spider books were, and the moments that were kind of made them Spider fans. Because for me, it feels like something more modern. It doesn't feel like it, something that someone grew up on. So it's very interesting. I'm not usually I'm talking to creators who are much older than me, so I'm the young one. And right now I'm not. I'm the old one, and it's just interesting because I again I had lived experience. I picked all this stuff up, off the spinner rack or at my first comic book store when I was like 13, 14 years old. So it's really interesting to hear that like somehow, even though it's, years before you were born, you've still gone back and have such an affinity for this stuff and have made it kind of your mission to make sure that people, appreciate this era, which I've always been such a proponent for. And I'm really hoping that eventually we get the Amazing Spider-Man epics collecting this period. I would love epics collecting all of them, but even if we just get Amazing Spider-Man so that people can actually, physically pick up these issues by DeFalco and Scroce and Bennett, because you cannot do that. I mean, at least those issues are on Marvel Unlimited, like you mentioned. But anyways, your passion blows me away. Your picture, all your collection, all the Ben Reilly stuff you have, like my friends and I who are on the podcast, we're always talking about it because they're so interesting. And one of them, I'm not much of an action figure guy, but one of my brother-in-law is. And so he looks at your pictures. He's like, all right, that's that figure. That's that figure. Oh, what did he do there? He bought how many Mafx's? Like, he was blown away. He's like, are you going to talk to this guy? I'm like, he's going to come on the show at some point, but I didn't realize I'd be on your show first. But anyways, he's blown away by your collection. So he has lots of questions.
I greatly appreciate it, and I'm happy to discuss anything. People said that I exhibit biblical levels of greed, quote unquote, for the amount of things that I own, which I think is really funny. And I'll say this publicly here since it's happening, but I'm actually buying the 6 original Tom Lyle Ben Reilly designs here soon, the original
really?
artwork. So that's kind
Wow.
of going to be the crown jewel of the whole collection. So I'm very excited to have those. But I really appreciate it. I think a lot of people don't really know how, I guess, young I am. I want to say how old I am, but I guess how young I am, and for the affinity that I have for this stuff. So I appreciate the compliments, and I'm definitely a big fan of yours too. Now more so than ever, just for listening. I did listen to the Glenn Greenberg episode as like right before this as a little like just lead up. But yeah, no, if anybody is interested in a really well articulated, like brilliant questions, very specific questions that I would totally ask somebody, I really would like you to check out Comic Shenanigans. Just he's interviewed just about anybody you can think of that you probably like, and even some people you don't. So
Mm-hmm.
I suggest that you definitely give it a look. Especially, I mean, the newest episode with Marcus Toe is really great too. I love Red Robin, so it's like anytime I can hear someone
He
talk about
was
anything I like is great.
he was so cool, but what threw me off in a good way is that we're the same age. And it's like, that's not, again, common, because
Yeah.
usually it's older creators. So we're both born in 83. So that was kind of interesting. And we're both living in Toronto at this moment. So
Wow.
that was kind of fun too. One thing I'll tell you, and then I'll get off, is that one of my favorite interviews, only because it's so bizarre that it even happened. This would have been 2017. So I've been doing the show about 4.5 years at that point. And I was able to get in touch with Chip Zdarsky. And I was like, I'd love to have you on the show. And he's like, oh, like you're in Toronto? I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh, you're local. Why don't I just come over to your house? And I'm like, okay. So he just came over to my house. And at the time, my wife was traveling. So it was me and my, I guess, 2.5-year-old son at that time. Actually, let me think about it. 2017, 3.5. So, he's in bed, should be in bed. Chip comes in, we just sit on my couch and we're recording. And every once in a while, my son would come downstairs and be like, I can't sleep. And Chip would be like, oh, we're a PG podcast now. And I like have to stop the recording and take my son away and come back. And I think we just chatted for like 3 hours on my couch. And I, in the back of my head, was like, at some point, Chip's going to want to go, right? Like if he's not enjoying himself, he wouldn't still be here. But like, I hope he doesn't feel like I'm keeping him trapped in my home. But it was very cool. And, I got him to sign a bunch of trades that I had of his material at that point. And that's probably my favorite interview I've done, just because it was so different.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
Just Chip Zdarsky hanging out at my house. And I guess for people who have listened to my show, Ron Friends is like the, I don't know what you call it, he's the patron saint of my podcast. He's been on, I think, 17 times. I'm really close friends with like Ron Friends now, and sometimes I'll be like, oh, I have a question about this book. He's like, you don't have to wait for a podcast, you can just call me, we're friends. And I'm like, oh my god, I'm friends with Ron Friends, like that's a real thing. I got to meet him a few years ago. I got to go to his studio, took him out for lunch. Afterwards, he gave me like this big hug, and it was really a friend of mine who does the show with me sometimes. He calls him my comics daddy, in a very loving way, because he's just this tremendously giving individual who's done so many podcasts with me, so many conversations. So if you like Ron Friends, there's a lot to enjoy of him on my show. We really get deep in a lot of his work, and it's just it's a gift that I never thought I would have, that somehow that this creator that I always loved is now like friends of mine. And then another one that's similar is that Chuck Austin, who's kind of, he says that he hit comics like a bomb. He was everywhere for a very short period of time, and then he was gone, but everyone remembers he was there. That's what Chuck Austin is to comics in the early 2000s. And so we've become friends as well, because I had him on the show a few times, and he really likes coming back, and it's actually been really nice. And I think he's been on 4 or 5 times, and now we're just like coming up with reasons to talk about things on the show. And he's like, Adam, I didn't write that many comics. At some point we're going to run out. And I'm like, we'll see. I'll keep going through your bibliography. And he's like, all right, let's do it. So anyways, that's the last I'll say about comic shenanigans for today.
Awesome. Well, whenever we do Hobgoblin Lives, which is something that we're going to do here soon, if you want to be on that too, you're more than welcome to, since you're a big
Absolutely.
Friends guy. So my co-host, Matthew, he is an absolute Ron Friends super fan. So I know he's really looking forward to that book.
Send him my 17 podcast.
I will. Now that I know that, I will definitely send him at least 1 or 2 of those, and also listen to them myself. Well, thank you again so much. I know you have to get going. I have to get going too. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and can't wait to do it again and also be on yours someday.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Have a great night. Thank you. Bye.